Welcome to the Headache Doctor Podcast, where it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication, allowing you to thrive in everything you do. All right, Jeff, thanks for being on the Headache Doctor Podcast. It's a pleasure to... you came into our office here at Novera Headache Center. What was that, 2 weeks ago? A couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I think so.
And I was just so impressed with your level of understanding of our microbiome and gut health, and you had some powerful stories to share with us. And so it was just natural for me to want you on the podcast so our listeners can hear this, and then we can connect it to the headache and migraine population out there. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to just spread the word more, help people know what's available.
Yeah, why don't we start off with your background, and then I want to segue that into what functional medicine actually is.
Sure. Yeah, so I my background's as a nurse practitioner, and I learned about functional medicine out of necessity because my daughter was diagnosed with autism, and we were, run through all the typical drugs and ended up with, heavier drugs that I was saying, hey, I'm going to draw the line here. We're not going to go down this path any further. And I began researching and found an astonishing truth that as a Western medicine trained practitioner, I had only been taught the pharmaceutical knowledge. And that was the answer that we were given. The tools we were given is usually drugs and surgeries. And it really wasn't serving my family well at that point. But there was other science available that goes much, much further into actually figuring out what's going on under the surface so you can help somebody, and not just using diagnosis to categorize a situation, but really diving deeper to find out how you can help a person. And so I began trying to find help for my daughter, ran into some pitfalls in looking for functional medicine, which forced me to continue to learn. And eventually what we do at my office is a little more unique in that we systematize the functional medicine science so that you can get a better result for people. And I learned that because I eventually had to take over on my daughter's situation because I was seeing gaps in how people were going about, giving her support, and they were more a natural supportive type of approach rather than really systematically going through and putting all the pieces back into the right order for her. And when we did that for her systematically, when I took over and we got the right data, we were able to see a dramatic result and basically an amazing reversal of the autism, and I got my daughter back, which then pretty much jettisoned me out of the Western medicine field at that point from an ethical standpoint. It just was getting real hard writing the script over and over that I knew wasn't going to help. And so I ended up opening Upstream Functional Medicine, help other people not have to spend all those years trying to figure it out. And so the more I can really help people know what functional medicine is and what it can do for them, then they don't have to go through what I went through, and they can just skip to the end, would be my hope.
Yeah, so having a testimony like that where your own daughter is having these symptoms or is presenting with autism, and you're able to reverse that, and you said get your daughter back, that sounds that sounds kind of crazy to a lot of people, I'm sure. And so, but that's, to me, it's the excitement. I'm sure to you as a parent and going on this journey, there's so much excitement behind that process and seeing your daughter improve and heal. But I want you to, can you explain, just as you did the other day, what functional medicine is and why it can be trusted, and why, just because we have not heard of this sort of process and someone with autism having that process reversed, even though that sounds foreign to us, why can we still trust this as a real thing?
Yeah, so I could relate it a little bit to your story as we were talking earlier, and as a practitioner, your discovery that you could take a lot of the tools we have and use them better and use them to create bigger differences, but we kind of got in a rut of using tools a certain way. And in Western medicine, we got in a rut of using one single tool, is the pharmaceutical tool. So we only got that science, even in our training. And really all that functional medicine is just to kind of obliterate any misconceptions out there of,
Right.
oh, it's not even alternative medicine. I wouldn't put it in that category whatsoever, because most people tell me, well, this is what I would do first, and then I would use a drug if I had to, and I'd more categorize Western medicine as an alternative medicine for certain types of things, and it's the first thing you want to do for emergencies and a lot of other things. It's spectacular what technology we have in Western medicine, but all functional medicine is just the rest of the science not tied to a pharmaceutical. As simple as that. Somebody said, hey, can you explain to me how it's different from, naturopathy or Chinese medicine and other things? And I said, okay, if you take the data that we have that shows what really does work in naturopathy, what does work in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and kind of go down the list and think of all the different things out there, and where we have the data is where functional medicine is kind of in the Venn diagram, and that's what we're using. So we'll see practitioners from all these fields come into the functional medicine space, and then pull from a lot of the things that have been learned for 1,000 years in their trades, but they'll focus in on the data-driven side of it through functional medicine, so that we can get consistent results, and it's not as practitioner reliant, because there's variation between practitioner to practitioner if you're doing kinesiology and other things like that, which you can use those tools, but let's also make sure we're driving things with data, and then you have certain types of interventions that have been proven, and you're going to have a more consistent, reliable result, which is, I find, what most people come to us for, and they're really excited to finally know what's going on, and they knew something was wrong the whole time, but nobody had been able to show them yet and show them how it fits together, and then give them a strategy to actually unravel that mystery and get on with their lives. So functional medicine you can rely on I would rely on it more as a first move for your health, and even better application is preventatively. It's just most of us are human, and we got to be in enough pain to really want to actually be proactive for our health. From a medical standpoint, I mean, you should be out exercising and practicing mindfulness and eating, understanding your nutrition. But there's a lot of confusion out there from the internet about what that looks like and what it is, and how do you know what's right for you. And again, that's where functional medicine can dial it in.
Yeah, I love that. I think it brings so much clarity for myself, and I'm sure listeners are benefiting from that perspective, that in-depth analysis of functional medicine, because even though it's probably been positioned as alternative in the sense of it's not as prevalently utilized, the understanding that we're actually getting to the root cause of this, and symptom management should be secondary. I think that's awesome. So when I am seeing here at Novera Headache Center, when we're treating someone with headaches or migraines, every now and then we'll come across a patient that the inflammation systemically, there are signs that just tell us they have a lot of inflammation. And one of those things that, from a physical therapist perspective, is their sensitivity level. Hypersensitivity is joint pain, kind of diffuse joint pain. When we're working on their skin itself, there's sort of this like clamminess to it. Maybe it gets red, that erythema, the redness, just after we barely touch them or barely work on them, they'll have that response within the skin itself. And then maybe their threshold to what they can tolerate as far as their headaches and migraines is just so low. And so what I'm doing is bringing in the context of someone with headaches and migraines, and then trying to understand from a physical therapist perspective, it's sort of out of my specialty or my scope to be able to understand and help them get their inflammation to a point where their threshold for what they can tolerate and like their body's joint pain is at an appropriate level. And that's where you come in. And we've had several patients, one we were just talking about, where they'll make progress through our process, but there's sort of a limit to it. And so we want to partner with providers like yourself in functional medicine And so all this is a long way of teeing you up for talking about our microbiome and our gut health and what that has to do with someone that has headaches or any sort of musculoskeletal problem. So maybe let's start with defining the microbiome, what that is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll pull the zoom out for a moment here. And when we think about headaches, it's important to think that it's both. There's oftentimes mechanical aspects that Novera is addressing at a whole nother level than a regular physical therapist, and probably even would you say different than the chiropractics are taking a different angle, and then there's the inflammatory component.
Right.
And I'm going to kind of go back to the mechanicals. Some of the mechanicals probably related to some nutritional and habits, and trauma and a lot of different things. So it all ties together, and there's a building ecosystem as we're learning to collaborate better as practitioners that are actually seeking truth and trying to not just, here's the next pill, here's the next room, here's the next pill, but which all of those practitioners have great intentions. They just fell into a system they didn't realize was there. I was one of them. And when you kind of come out of the matrix, if you will, you realize, oh my gosh, we can really help people like I thought I could coming into the field. And so I can't do everything. We got to have good, people to help with this area and that area. And there's so many subspecialties that it becomes like a whole new world of collaboration that isn't, all about functional medicine by any means. It's just all about, hey, what's available for my health, really, outside of my typical insurance system coverage that's all loculated into a Western medicine little category. Now, if you zoom back in to get to your question, when we start looking at the inflammatory aspects of things, and that's where I would put that umbrella over functional medicine, even though it's definitely not limited to that. That really is a common denominator of a lot of the work we're doing, is figure out where the inflammation's coming from, and it's never one smoking gun. It's all the different pieces that are just knocked over and knocked each other over, and we got to go back through and methodically put them back in place. And the microbiome is the board the chess pieces sit on, if you will, and so it's the platform piece. And as I sat through Institute for Functional Medicine classes and lectures and long, like very long days, like 9-hour days of that's a lot of lecture, by the way. Your brain starts to melt at a certain point. And every single time I started seeing a pattern, and they kept saying, hey, none of these things that I'm talking about really matter if you don't handle the gut microbiome. If the gut's not working right, this stuff doesn't matter. So one thing I want people to know, listeners, to really be aware of is if you're talking to someone who's starting you off with, let's start chasing your hormones around, let's try a detox, let's figure out where your food sensitivities are, and I apologize if I'm stepping on toes, that's usually a sign that they know a little about functional medicine and have learned enough to dabble in this and start manipulating some downstream symptoms. And it's kind of like putting a pill to the ill, only it's natural, usually, in those cases. But those are all symptoms of a problem. They're not the real problem. They cause a problem. But the real problem is going to get deeper, as in maybe discussing things about like the microbiome being one of them, toxicology is another major area, and the list can go on. And we have to think about the microbiome as this is step one in pretty much any situation that we need to help somebody. Is we got to know what's going on with the microbiome. And you don't have to have symptoms for this to be an issue. We get healthy people that come in and see us that say, I have no problems, I'm on no meds, but I know that functional medicine is going to keep me out of trouble, and I want that because I don't want to end up like I saw so-and-so who was doing just fine until he wasn't either. And so we look at their microbiome through different types of stool studies. We have some that we've honed in on over the years. We've done them all. We use lots of different companies. And they're looking at same type of technology that we use in Western medicine is, DNA, PCR technology, and other cultures and different types of things to understand as much as we can. It's really just a spot of the picture. We may have 8,000, or we're supposed to at least have 8,000 different species of bacteria in our gut. We probably, in our country, after all, the processed food and chlorinated water and antibiotics and the list goes on, have maybe 4,000 to 6,000 varieties in our gut. And we're getting to see maybe 75 markers off of that picture. So we know we're looking through a keyhole, but we're getting markers that we can associate with, outcome data. When we influence these markers, we get big outcomes. So they are key pieces of information that may look at what types of good bacteria do you have, and do you have enough of the healthy lactobacilli and all the things. What about the bad bacteria? Some of those are associated with higher incidence of autoimmune disease, and the bad bacteria and viruses and parasites and yeast, fungi that you don't want overgrowing in there can all throw off endotoxins. And this is the key of why this is, creates problems. So if you, for instance, have taken an antibiotic and it killed off the strep throat, hopefully, but then it also killed off a bunch of other good bacteria, and now something more resistant that is a bacteria that produces endotoxins that are bad for you and cause inflammation. Now that overgrows, and I'll use yeast as an example. And you never want to it's never the one thing, so don't ever try to chase the one thing around. But now I'm on a soapbox here. We talk about the microbiome. I could go on.
Yeah.
Keep going. So you got yeast overgrowth. So this is kind of a scenario you might see. So for people who are finding that they crave sugars, this is one scenario that could be going on and that we see commonly. And they're craving sugars, and what really is happening is they're releasing the yeast overgrowth, because they've been on an antibiotic, doesn't do anything to the yeast, but it kills off the bacteria that were keeping it in check. The yeast overgrows, and now it's producing an endotoxin that hits your brain and tells you need sugar and you need it now. And people think, I have low blood sugars or something. Actually, maybe not. not in a lot of cases. And so then they go and they eat the sugar, and they're not feeding themselves. They're feeding the beasties inside them, if you want to think about it in a little bit of a freaky way, which I thought was kind of an isolated thought until I was watching a National Geographic film. And this is crazy. And so if you can't handle crazy stuff, then stop here. But if you're listening and this will freak you out a little bit, but you can go find it probably online and watch National Geographic and a mold spore. And they get the mold spore on film, and it's floating through the air, and it lands on the back of an ant. And then it spreads some hyphae into it, starts to root in a little bit. Ant's still alive, and then they talk about how it's secreting an endotoxin that goes to the brain of the ant and drives the ant to go somewhere like a zombie ant, to a place that's a better environment for that mold spore to proliferate. And once it gets to that perfect spot, then the mold spore just kills it off and blows up and proliferates from there. And I was just like mind blown watching this. I was traumatized watching this in some ways and thinking, this is what's happening in our bodies when we crave sugar. And it's because of yeast overgrowth. Oh my gosh, that is very similar, and we think we have to eat the sugar. So these are the type of things, though, that kind of, to circle back to the end point of all this, is they cause inflammation, they cause leaky gut, which you can find out more about. We don't have to go too much down that tangent, but that's what leads to food sensitivities, and eventually to one of the triggers called molecular mimicry that can lead to autoimmune disease. And if you don't figure out what's going on, then that's why people statistically get 2 or 3 autoimmune diseases in their lifetimes. Nobody stops to figure out why. This is one of the mechanisms of why, is from inflammation in the gut leading to a leaky gut. Usually food sensitivities are one of the early symptoms, although that's not going to mean it's going to progress to that by any means. Some of it's because of the weird food we have. And this inflammation is now causing fluctuations in how your body can function. And basically that bedrock foundation piece, or the baseboard to the chessboard, is now unstable, and its pieces start falling, and then you can't play the game. And that's kind of I guess I'll summarize with that.
Wow. That is kind of a terrifying image of that, the ant just being controlled by this mold spore. So clinically, I've had patients, they'll have a great week, and then another week will go by, and they'll have a migraine that'll onset. And so one of our jobs is to sort of dissect what might have triggered that scenario. And for a lot of people, if you're stuck in this realm of, I have no idea what's causing my symptoms, oftentimes whether the chessboard is shaken enough where it sounds like everything's a problem, we just got to start working backwards. And so it's not as if one thing is going to be the trigger that you're aware of. I mean, we see the same as well here, that we almost have to start picking these pieces apart and addressing certain things, and then there'll be clarity down the road. But when we get that clarity, I've had it with patients where they'll consume sugar. Like I had a cupcake, and that triggered my migraine. And so this is really fascinating to me, because the fact that you're almost like just feeding the yeast, you're not even like, the yeast has control of your mind, and then it's telling it wants to eat, and then you consume that cupcake or the sugary drink or the Starbucks coffee in the morning, which then triggers this inflammatory response. Am I correct in this?
Absolutely.
Which can be like pretty immediate. I mean, these people will say, like, I don't know, it's moments later. They'll feel their onset of symptoms. This is maybe a little bit of tangent. I didn't necessarily prep this question, but as far as like what's happening there when we consume and ingest something and then like immediately we feel off, we're just that in tune with our GI system?
Yeah. If you think about it, if you take a shot of espresso, how long does it take for you to realize you had a shot of espresso? Almost immediately. It's into the body very quickly, and things are influenced just as quickly. And we have, the bacteria are all communicating with each other through something called quorum sensing, and there's just this whole network that's alive inside of us in what's called a biofilm. You think of like sweaters on your teeth or pond scum, forming. It's not bad, and a lot of people think, oh, biofilm's bad. We want a biofilm because it stabilizes our gut microbiome, and it can be good or bad depending on what's in it. But as soon as something goes into it, it's alive and communicating. It's electric. It's a networked immediate response. Your immune system, 70% of it is housed in the gut. The gut-brain connection is a big deal in managing. 90% of your your serotonin, which is a mood stabilization neurotransmitter, is produced in the gut. And any kind of instabilization, especially so when people have migraines, there are oftentimes some predisposing genetic factors and different things involved, but change is the problem. And so if most people with migraines know, if you mess up your routine, you don't get enough sleep, you don't eat at the right time, you have sugar spikes, even the glucose changes in the bloodstream can be part of that. And all these other influences, a lot of times missing the endotoxin side of the picture, which we kind of elucidated on today. And any of these, changes shake up the picture and create the instability that leads to the migraine. So it's important that people know what these triggers are as a sort of a first step in stabilizing, and then they can get a lot of the work done, mechanical or inflammatory, and tolerate it, to be able to get through the work. But it's important to know that that's not the last step, is just avoiding that thing that causes the migraine maybe not be the final thing, because it's going to be something else later. If you have a leaky gut and you got a food sensitivity to eggs or something like that, and that just means you have a leaky gut, doesn't mean eggs are the problem. They're not the problem. The exception might be, of course, like genetically modified gluten and things like that are right. they are the problem, and you may not want to indulge too much in that area.
Yeah. So to play it back to your comment on serotonin. So for our listeners, I would say for the most part, if you're receiving a prescription medication for your migraines, it's likely manipulating serotonin or mimicking serotonin. It's changing what your body is experiencing and playing off of what serotonin does. So triptans, like if you take a Maxalt, rizatriptan, even these CGRP drugs that are the latest and greatest, things like Aimovig, Ajovy, even Nurtec. I mean, so when we're talking about like if you, the listener, want to naturally find a way to let serotonin levels function at an optimal level as neurotransmitters, you're saying, let's look at gut health.
Right. And it goes beyond serotonin. It's, we, in the pharmaceutical side, there's the use of calcium channel blockers for neurovascular stabilization, and even anti-seizure meds, Topamax for prevention, and because there's some tie-ins with seizure stuff and migraines, and you look at all the medications, and they're really amazing because they're changing people's lives and giving them their lives back in a lot of ways. But it's important for them. Most people are aware now. Well, I guess I shouldn't say most. A lot of people more and more are aware that, that's just a Band-Aid. Right. Like, that did not fix the problem. I'm sure glad to have an out, but what's the real solution? And when we look at the things it does, like serotonin, mechanisms, even in SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Zoloft and Paxil, all these, they can also help. But because they're stabilizing serotonin levels in your body, okay, good. Well, if that worked, let's go figure out why it happened. And a lot of that almost always comes back to in your gut. Are you malabsorbing certain nutrition? You can't get enough magnesium into your body to be able to run the show, and the list kind of goes on from there. So a lot of it does come back to the gut, and the medications are just an indication that there's something wrong that you could probably fix with looking at the gut to begin with, and that may not be the only step, but it's probably a really foundational step.
Yeah, hence the name of your functional medicine practice, which is Upstream.
Right.
So much of what we're doing in the allopathic model, so the Western medicine model, and even it was fascinating to hear your reasoning with even a lot of natural or holistic providers are still working downstream. And so it takes a very different mindset to even think upstream. And I guess what I'm saying is, or what I'm pulling away from our conversation is, if you're looking for a trigger for your headache or migraine, you may be seeing something that you're going to impact really downstream, and so we need to think upstream. And so even what might seem as a more natural approach, I don't know, eliminate dairy, gluten, there may be something even more upstream that we can look at, which brings me to why would someone, instead of taking upon themselves, like, I'm just going to transform my diet, what's the benefit of actually seeing a professional like yourself to get specific with their microbiome, what needs to be recovered, or just looking at all those pieces that need to come into play? What's the benefit there compared to just creating their own diet?
Right. So there's a lot that you can do, and I'll give you some tips and tricks of what can you start with, where can you begin on your own. But what I've found, I guess my experience has been, and I'm seeing the cases that this didn't work, but a lot of people try to work on their nutrition and even their gut health, and they'll see a difference from maybe taking a probiotic, because you kind of put any good influence into the microbiome, and it for a while will create some change that can oftentimes be very helpful. But in the end, kind of a little bit longer view of it all, that it's not enough to break up the biofilm, really get rid of the bad guys, and then in concert with the right nutrition and other lifestyle practices, rebuild a healthy microbiome. And my experience has just been that I see a lot of people who've tried for years, and they got results for a while, and then they were gone. And then they got results for a while, changing something up, and then they were gone, and they never quite reached a goal of, hey, when does this ever end? And what am I missing? And they'll be doing the FODMAPs diet and the, anti-candida diet, and then they're on to some other diet, and they're realizing, well, this isn't even sustainable. But then when I go off it, all the problems come back. And so there's a huge advantage to gather the data, line up all the bad guys, take them out. And there's some strategy using supplements to do that, because you got to break up the biofilm and do a lot more. There's a holistic kind of approach. I guess I don't like using that word very much. There's a much more comprehensive way to do it. And we use the data to drive a comprehensive approach that we combine, supplements with lifestyle stuff. So you only have to do it once, and then you're finished and you get on with your life. And so I think that there are a lot of generalities out there that are helpful for people. And for some people, that's enough. And you can try that. But for a lot of people, it just conceptually wouldn't work anyway, because you can't totally change your biofilm that way. It would take years if you did, and pretty extreme circumstances to make that real change happen permanently, whereas we can accelerate the process quite a bit for you and get the job done. And that's where I might relate it to, I can do some handyman stuff around my house here, but that's not my forte.
Yeah.
And there have been enough projects I've done where I'm like, I've wasted so much time and money trying to figure this out. Let me just hire a professional, come on here, get it done, and then we can get on with things. And that's maybe a way that I relate to what we do, and say, if you want done right, and this is your body. This is not like you're a little hobbyist thing. You only get one of these earth suits and one shot at this life, and you can't get these years back. So it's an important thing to get right. Yeah.
Let's talk about those tips and tricks, because one of the things that I think people love about this podcast is I try to be as practical as possible. I mean, the mission is to educate and empower. Okay, so people can take the education and do something with it. And then that empowerment piece is like applying it to their situation and feeling like, ooh, I have a little bit more sense of control over my own health. So, I'm curious what you got for us, because I teed you up for this before the podcast.
Yeah. So, first of all, I'll make mention that the work at Novera is going to be different than just a repetitive work, and they're looking like functional medicine is at a deeper level, and they're trying to figure out, how does all this really fit together? The problem may be here, but I'm going to look over here, and here, and we're going to even incorporate a lot of your body mechanics and lifestyle and pieces like that. So it has to be that way to get a result, an effective result. And so functional medicine, very similarly, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, and we're going to not just look at the pain point, we're looking at the bigger picture and what else is going on. And if you're trying to make an influence on this on your own, you can do a lot of great things. And I'll start with number one, start learning about functional medicine, because there's more than I can give you in these few tips or tricks. Get on Dr. Hyman's, website, podcast, etc. Mark Hyman's, one of the leaders in the field, and one of the teachers at the Institute for Functional Medicine, where I've got my certification, and Chris Kresser, and there's the Huberman Lab, and all kinds of great resources out there to begin that learning process. So that I'll give you a few tidbits here, but there's just a litany of other things you can start learning and incorporating over the years. But if we're focusing on gut microbiome today, and I'll, even thinking about headaches and migraines, of course, there's going to be the influence of mechanics and of, blue light exposures and screen time, especially, again, relating that with, some relationship to seizures and some of these other things that you'll probably learn from Jono's teaching. From a microbiome standpoint, there's some real basic stuff you can do. Number one, sugar feeds the beasties, and so we have sugar in a lot of things, and if you stop and look at how much sugar is really going into your body, you might rethink it a little bit. It helps to track some of these, and so if you use like MyFitnessPal or something, Chronos or some app to really look at what's going in your body, how many carbs, how many sugars of the carbs or sugars, and other things, then you can see what am I feeding here. And the way you feed the healthy microbiome is through fibrous vegetables, or any kind of vegetable is really going to be what makes them stronger, and the sugar is what makes the beasties stronger, the bad type of bacteria and candida and other things. And so if you find that you have a high sugar diet and a low vegetable diet, then start making the shift and figure out, where can I pull things out of, do I need sugar in my ketchup, really? And all the things, little things over time make a big difference, and start figuring out, how can I get vegetables in at breakfast? Sounds crazy, but if you go over and you look at the Mediterranean diet, in the Mediterranean, these people are scooping vegetables onto their plate and piling it this high at breakfast. and it's just really how, that's why all the data on the Mediterranean diet is so good. And we don't realize that's what they're really doing. So it's the ratios of sugar and vegetables. And then I would add, let's reseed our body, like plant seeds for the good microbiome. You get that from live, active, cultured foods. So that'd be kind of my second point. First point, eat lots of vegetables, cut back the sugar. Second point, eat fermented live active culture foods. So you can't get sauerkraut from the aisle. You have to get it in the refrigerated section. And it'll say live active cultures on it, and it's got this, this, and this in it. So you can get, and you can make your own at home, which is kind of a fun little hobby to do off and on. And you get it even stronger that way. And then the third, and that's putting the good bacteria in. So now you're feeding the healthy stuff and you're starving out the bad stuff. You're adding the good kind to this picture. And then you can further that with, and a lot of people are learning about bone broth these days, and that's just a tool you can use periodically, but it was probably a pretty regular part of our human existence to use, a bone broth to make soups and stuff like that. So it has a lot of collagen in it, which is a kind of a big deal right now on the market today. And it'll be a big deal for a while, and then it'll kind of fade, and it'll just be a tool we still have in the tool bag. Everything gets highlights over time, but bone broth should just be kind of a regular part of how you make soups. And maybe you drink bone broth, and maybe you don't like that, but you can cook a little vegetable soup, throw some sauerkraut on it if it's not too hot to kill off the live active cultures, and you're getting everything I just talked about in one sitting. And it's like powerhouse for your gut health and healing up the leaky gut, the tight junctures that get damaged from, all the different exposures we have in our first world country. And it's really going to help you begin to heal the microbiome and fortify the healthy microbiome. And that will make a difference. And it isn't just temporary. It will actually make a pretty significant difference for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. When you were talking about veggies for breakfast, one of my favorite characters on Parks and Rec is Ron Swanson. And I think I can quote him saying, "Why would I eat the food that my food eats?"
Yeah. Well, I eat that food too.
Yeah.
So.
He's a big meat guy. But anyways, how can people get a hold of you? This is incredibly valuable. People in Colorado are going to want to find you. So how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so we can help anybody in Colorado. We're working with people because, of course, we all learned telemedicine a few years back, right? And so we can help people all over the state of Colorado. We have a robust telemedicine aspect. But if you're in Colorado Springs, come in and see us. And we're at Kissing Campbell's Office Park. But the easiest way to get in touch with us is just go to the website, and it's upstreamfunctionalmedicine.com. So 3 words, you'll find us. And if you just search Functional Medicine Colorado Springs, you'll find us. But it's Upstream Functional Medicine, and we will oftentimes just do a discovery call, a free 15-minute, hey, let's make sure this is a good fit before we go schedule in a full appointment. And then we make it inexpensive to get in and see if we can help you, and if you're a good fit for our approach, and if we feel like we can take your case and you feel like, yep, you guys are the ones that can help me, then we like to strategize the whole plan to help you get from beginning to end where you're trying to go, and the strategy is all laid out at that visit. So you have an end in sight, and you know how you're going to get there, and we can make it happen that way, a lot more strategically. So just
and one of the things,
the website.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about your whether it's your website or just interacting with you or your organization, and this is true for Novera, is so you think about, you call the neurology office, and maybe that phone conversation, like the person on the other end of the line, is somewhat helpful. But if you get an appointment, they're going to be like, well, it's 3 months out, and then you're waiting for this appointment, and maybe you're disappointed because you don't feel like they listen, and they give you another prescription medication. Like, those are the things that we as providers are working hard to not do. And so I sent Jeff a patient, and within a week she was in his office talking to him, and she hasn't, to my knowledge, paid him anything yet. And this is because we care enough to make sure that you're making an educated decision, and we want you to know about your health, and that's why we do these things like these podcasts. So Jeff Hunter is right in line. You're right in line with Upstream and what you guys are doing. And so I'm happy to have you as a partner in just making the world a healthier place.
Yeah, thanks, John. You guys run a great show over there, too. I appreciate what you do.
All right. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
All right. You're welcome. It's a pleasure.